And again, shout out to Indeed.com. And we want to welcome NADA's very own Juliet, Guerra, and Sherry Schultz with Walser Automotive Group, Bloomington, Minnesota. Put your hands together. Take it away. Thank you very much. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Madison, for that warm welcome. As Madison said, I'm Juliet Guerra, our Director of Media Relations here at NADA. And thank you so much for joining the first live stage segment of the day, where we're going to focus on diversity and inclusion, a really hot topic for most of us. Most of us here are really aware of the impact of diversity and inclusion and the importance of having that as part of our dealership. But one of the things that it brings is it brings breadth of knowledge, experiences to a dealership that really impacts not only the business, but the employees and the retention of those employees. So we don't need to prove that value to anyone out here. But what we can talk about is what can dealers do to promote more diversity and inclusion. So with me, I have Sherry Schultz. Sherry is Walser Automotive's Chief Human Resource Officer. She took that role in 2018, and at Walser, she does a lot of things. Just to name a few, she oversees employee relations, talent acquisition, leadership development, employee engagement, and diversity and inclusion. She also launched Walser's Servant Leadership Program and management training platforms, and she was responsible for the launch of 2 employee resource groups, both focused on growing diversity and inclusion and creating a high-performance company culture. So Sherry is also a member of the NADA Human Resources 20 group. So let's give a big welcome to Sherry. So thank you for joining us, Sherry.
Thank you, NADA, for having us. We appreciate it.
So Sherry, I want to start out just broadly talking about industry culture for the auto retail segment. And I think one of the things, while we know that diversity and inclusion is important, what is kind of in your mind the biggest industry barrier that we have in auto retail?
I think it's perception. I think the expectation that people have when they come to a dealership group or they come to automotive is not actually what's happening. So I think that a lot like some of the speakers we heard yesterday, how do we tell a different story? Right? If you tell the same story over and over again, you're going to get the same result. Mm-hmm. So what is compelling about the work that we do, and how do we begin to rebrand that value proposition, not just for Walser or a single dealer group, but for the industry? Mm-hmm. So what can we do as a dealership group in partnership with our OEMs to reframe what a career looks like in automotive? How do we do that? So I think that's first is the barrier, and then I think ultimately beyond that, leadership buy-in. And making sure that your CEOs, your general managers, believe that it's good for business, mm-hmm. right? Because if there's an understanding that it's good for business, buy-in creates behavior. Mm. And once you have that, then those barriers begin to come down. The last thing I'd say is it's an education as well. We talked a little yesterday about biases and things that people feel exist, so therefore they perpetuate them. Mm-hmm. How do we challenge those and just begin to think and act differently? I can tell the group we were backstage before, and we had a 10-minute conversation around, is it women? Is it ladies? What do we call each other? As simple a nuance as that is, how do we begin to ask, how do you frame this topic up? How do we talk to women about what's the right way to approach them? And it was an interesting dialogue that we had this morning about that. So those are the 3 things that I'd say are barriers for us.
Got it. So at Walser specifically, I think, what are some of the initial best practices, small baby steps that you've seen that have really changed the dealership culture to, again, improve mm-hmm. the retention of, diverse employees?
So I think one of the things is that we didn't approach it as we're going to go after diversity. Mm-hmm. We approached it as, and I think this is just true in every industry, diversity is what your employees tell you it is. Mm. So if you don't ask, you will generate programs and initiatives that may or may not resonate with your people. So one of the things that I think we do well is we ask people, who are you? What matters? What do you care about? And we do something that if you're inside the Walser walls, you'd understand an exercise we do called the values exercise. And we talk to people a lot about what matters most to them and the values that exist in their lives. So we do that with every new hire. We do it as part of the interview process. And then we do it as team building and kind of just networking amongst ourselves. So you begin to understand what's important to your population, right? And so when we did that, it wasn't as if we were imposing diversity programs. We knew what mattered to people. So we didn't say, here's a top-down approach to diversity. No. We said to our organization, what does inclusion mean to you? What do you want to be known for? So we asked, and we've probably done, our 400 roundtables on this topic. We also run an engagement survey annually that gets at how are you feeling, And I think one of the things that I'd like to begin for the industry to begin to shift the thinking and the terminology is away from the notion of diversity and inclusion and to belonging, that we all belong. Being counted for what you are versus what you do, I think is a risk in this platform. And so the survey allowed us to gain insights as to what was making people feel like they belonged or things like they didn't. So ask.
Yeah.
Ask first and figure out what matters to people.
So, given that you guys, your first step is to take a look at what do people care about. So just to put it in terms of like real life example, what were some of the things that your survey and your research found that Walser employees cared about?
So I think anybody who's either listening or works with us knows we did this exercise, and top of the charts was family. Regardless of color, gender, sexual orientation, any of those things, family, 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 family. And it's a family that they define. So it could be their parents and care for them. It could be their own children. It could be their fur babies, which we hear a lot about as well, or all. So family was top of the charts for us. And so when we started working with all, because I think, and one of the things I want to get out there early, people always suggest for me that I'm advising on women. It's one part. Yeah. But I believe what's good for women is good for all. It isn't about that there's a profile that looks differently, because the details around family were the same for men, the same for them, the same for young newcomers to our industry, as well as those had been working in the automotive industry for 20 years. Family's important. So we asked that. And so programs that we created after we heard it by far as the #1 value, we have paid maternity, paternity, and adoption leave. And why do we have that? I'll go on record with saying we had 59 children in our group last year. So
wow,
we
congrats.
got some new baby Walsers into the world. And it was a value to all of a sudden be spending time with your children. And it's funny because 60-40 males are taking the paternity leave, not because exclusively the representation of women is less at this time. What a benefit. And somehow we assumed in inclusion that was a women's benefit. Wrong. It was a benefit for all the men that we work with. Said, oh my goodness, I can spend time with my child when they're born. And that was a nuance that we hadn't had in the past before. Yeah. So it's probably been one of our biggest initiatives based on asking the question,
that's great.
What do you want? How do you want to feel part of this company?
So for some of those dealers perhaps that can't implement a paid paternity or maternity leave policy at this stage, or maybe that's a little bit too ambitious, what are some of maybe the smaller tactical things that you implemented that a smaller dealer with less employees can perhaps start to adopt now?
Yeah, it's funny. I would suggest it's an interesting thing. So if it's a cost question I would challenge it for a second. Why can't they? First, so whether it's 1 week, whether it's 4 weeks, whether it's 12 weeks, right? So we all know we get time under FMLA, so that's just a given. To pay an employee a very 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and by the way, so we do a month, and the majority of our male participation is 2.6 weeks. So it's not as if it's the full month, but man, has it been valuable. So I would challenge that first to say, why can't you?
Okay.
And should you prioritize that? Now, if family is important in your dealership, right? So some of the other, the smaller components associated with that may be less monumental or less of a cultural shift, expectations around education and how to be inclusive. You'd be surprised how open folks were to understanding that. So the resource groups not only are fun, they drive and cost free. I mean, there's no cost to having a resource group.
And can you give us maybe a little bit insight about what the resource group looks like for maybe folks that are not familiar with employee resource groups?
Yeah. So we when we started the resource groups, it was two-pronged, right? It was a data analysis of who we had inside and who we wanted on the outside. So when you're looking at your census population and you're looking in your area and you're saying, man, I have to recruit. I really want to build a talent pipeline. we did the women's resource group. It's called WOW, Women of Walser. We did it first because in most cities, it's not atypical, 51% of the population is female. We didn't employ that. We know that that title holding stat is the same. 51, 80% is a decision maker in the deal. So from a consumer perspective, it completely made sense. And if we didn't shop in that or fish in that pond, we were missing a lot of people. So that was number one. Number two, when we talked to the women of our organization, a lot of them felt that there were two things missing. Confidence for themselves first and foremost. Right? So maybe I don't have a mentor. Maybe I don't feel confident to work with my GM or my COO. And then the other thing that was missing was an understanding by everybody else that those barriers existed. You know, and so it was really about tearing down barriers and myths, if you will. So we started the group. We had individuals that automatically just raised their hand and said, I want to be part of it. We formed 3 subcommittees that were actually company-sponsored elected positions. People said, hey, I want to be involved in this. And the 3 were business development, personal development, and community engagement. And so the women who joined this, as well as the men, because we have an equal number of men who participate in our resource group, they did it to improve the business performance, not just for women, for the total dealership. And that was the key. They did it on the personal front to be better, right? Not just an opportunity to connect, which is good, but we did it to strengthen our positions as human beings, which is great for men as well as women. And the third, man, when you sell cars in a zip code that you live in, you want to be relevant in that community. And so it's a wonderful way to ensure that your brand is being maintained in the community. So those were the platforms that we put in place. And then it's employee-led. And I think that's the most important for those that are considering resource groups. When people own the decision to do something, they live it. Right? When it's imposed on them, it's a little bit harder for them to feel like this is mine. But when they own it and they feel like they've created this, it's unstoppable. So.
Have you gotten some interesting anecdotes from employees who participated in, for example, WOW, or in one of your other employee retention or your employee resource groups, that has just really showed you that yes, this is working?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. At first, there was a little not resistance, but there was a question, and we had to get it out there straight out. This isn't a non-male group. It has nothing to do with that. People said, are you going to have men of Walser? So because there is. Once you are trying to count for something, it assumes exclusion. That wasn't it at all. And it's interesting because when you step back and you say, diversity or inclusion is basically the inherent connection that people have with the people around them. What's interesting is, and we talked about it yesterday, biases. Do I connect with somebody who looks like me? That's probably true. Is it better for me to connect with someone who doesn't look like me and the business and the customer? Of course it is. So we had those things to tear down. And what we began saying is what's good for WOW is good for all. Right? And so it began to kind of blossom after that. The other thing I'd say, and I have had this conversation from many general managers, and it's heartfelt for me, and it's, I think, why we do the work that we do in HR. I had many general managers who have said to me, diversity has become personal to me because I have a daughter. And when you step back and you say, for any of us in the room, would we want our daughter to work where we are? When you can say that, now you have engagement alive and well. Right? Because when I saw that happening, and it was the very same for our Drive with Pride group, for our LGBTQ plus employees, when people had a personal connection to the LGBT community, whether it's a child, and we are allies, whether it's a friend of the family, whether it's a sibling, it became personal. Therefore, they became champions of a place that was really welcoming for people.
That's great.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wonderful. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about hiring. Specifically, I know that one of the things that we face from a perception in auto retail is that auto retail is not a specifically women-friendly industry. So in some of your recruitments, or your recruiting efforts, how are you starting to bake diversity, inclusion into the recruitment process and the hiring process?
I mean, simple nuances for us to all look at is, do we have gender bias in our job descriptions? Are we writing things that appeal just more isolating to various people? What kind of pictures are you using? What kind of video are you showing? Are you being open in the visual that you're putting out there to folks? That's table stakes. That's not going to be provocative. I think from a looking like the marketplace, there are things that we know are important when you're trying to recruit, and one is show your brand. And we talked a bit about this in some of the sessions yesterday. How do you close the gap on what the potential hire feels your company is about faster? Do you do it through video? Do you do it through storytelling and things that tell a story? I think one of the most beautiful things about the history of the Walser Group and our CEO and general managers, they have so much great history with people, but yet they're still interested in moving it forward. So every time something happens, we tell that story and we show it. So it's kind of an active community, and it's our job from a recruiting perspective to tell that story externally. So I think that's one of the first things. Do you have a really good message? And do you have a position out there where people are looking? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have an Instagram account as a dealer? Are you social and digital? When you start doing some of these things, so that people know where to find you, and then you tell the story. So I think those are some important things if you're thinking about, how do you do that? As far as typically male-centric, the facts are it's true. It's true. It is historically. I am a dealer's daughter, by the way. My dad had 5 dealerships growing up, and I always promised him, I'm not going to do this, and I do now. So I am in the throes of a business that I love more than anything, and I'm a woman, so okay. But here's what I love about it. I think where the myth comes in, we think it's not a women's industry. We have to tell the story that it absolutely is. The elements of career can be marketing, sales, customer service in general, finance, HR, IT, digital, photography. I mean, it goes on and on. So I think you have to be willing to tell the story. The other thing I think that's important is 1 becomes 2, becomes 10, becomes 20. And so we are addition and then multiplication. So the more folks that you bring, the more reputational capital you have. And when you have that, then people refer. And they start to say, hey, I'd love to work there because my friend says it's a really great opportunity.
That's wonderful. So I think one of the things, too, is how have you started, beyond telling the story in advance of starting to recruit, how have you, expanded your efforts to get a more diverse pool of candidates, in your proactive recruiting efforts?
So I think involving yourself in any of your local, whether it's a chamber event, whether it's an event that is a local community activity that are women-focused, great opportunities. Whether you are part of a national organization, right, like NADA, or Catalyst for Women, or HRC, which is a wonderful organization for LGBTQ+. Putting yourself out there says, and I do believe, when a company is willing to make an investment in something, spend some money against it, it's real. I mean, it's real. If you say, hey, I'm going to put it out there and I have a CEO and general managers who care a great deal, that's perfect. When you're willing to put a budget against these initiatives and sign up for events and training and spend the money, then you're serious. So that's an important thing. So we looked at places that we could get a lot of exposure, right? A lot of meet a lot of people, and then again, you go back to it. So you have these partnerships externally. You have a strong recruiting platform, referral based. You tell your story often, and that's part 1. Because build it and they come. Yes, do they stay? Because that's the part that can take your vision from hero to zero, and that's the problem. I think for us, it's I take incredibly seriously every hire we make. Someone entrusted their career to us. Somebody said, I'm going to spend 8, 10, 12, whatever hours a day it is with you, and we want to be known for, you walked out of here better today than you were yesterday because of our presence in your lives. That's servant leadership at its core. when you bring women, or any employee for that matter, into the organization, do they have an opportunity to grow and develop? Can they bring their whole selves to work every day and speak their mind? Because one of the things that will kill you is if you did all this work, you brought it in, and they all leave. And so, you got to be thinking proactively about what is the stickiness of your decision to go after that. Again, if you go back to the original discussion, this was demographic data for us. We looked at the fact that there were 55% title holders, 80% on the decision-making perspective buying the vehicles. It made sense that we looked like it. So it isn't a hard sell. But man, is it steep recruiting out there. You heard yesterday us talk about negative unemployment rates, and the candidate is in the driver's seat. They tell you where they're going to work. And so, if you think there's a silver bullet, there's not. And I think you got to try a lot of things.
Yeah. I've actually anecdotally spoke to some dealers who, in some of their recruiting efforts have had a great meal or a great customer service experience, and have had engaged that person. Have you taken some of those, very grassroots, organic opportunities to recruit folks?
So I'll give you two fun examples. So I got an email from one of our service advisors from an email she had received from a customer who went into our Toyota Toyota store getting her car serviced, and she was greeted by two female advisors. And she sent a note and commented to us, I feel so welcome. I've never had that experience. Sometimes it's intimidating. I think it's intimidating sometimes regardless, just that you're in there to get your car fixed and you're not really sure what's going on with the vehicle. But those comments then also become part of our CSI and the expectations that we have in meeting the needs of folks. So those are the types of grassroots anecdotal. And when you hear it from one customer, man, it's like you want more. You want to hear more of those things. Another one is we have wellness rooms in our stores, and they're for nursing mothers, our employees, but also for customers, as well as areas for kids to have a little bit of an unwind time in the process. So I got another email from a customer who really appreciated the ability for her most important job, which is to take care of her kid, that we recognize that, and that they gave her a break for a minute to go do what she had to do in the wellness room, and that she could go back to and they ended up buying a car, and she was really happy. But to get a post on your wellness room from a nursing mother is kind of it's something that's so natural that we take for granted, but it's an important, those are some of the important stories that happen. One other thing that we do that I think is noteworthy in terms of grassroots and interesting things. We launched Bring Your Child to Work Day. And for those who have heard of this, it used to be in the 70s, Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. And it became important for the entire family to be involved in either dual careers or the career of a parent. We had a blast with it this year. We did it, and we had about 60 kids, maybe a little more, who came. And we showed them every function of the business. Our chief marketing officer talked to them about brand. We went through and we did a foundation, a philanthropic event. Our inventory team showed them cars. They voted on the best vehicle. I won't tell you which one it was, but it had a lot of technology in it, I'll say. So they got really down and deep with what their parents did at work. And so it was really fun. So we had a lot of photos that then were put out and helped us to tell the story a little bit better. And that was really grassroots, because now, people are coming around and asking us, hey, are we doing that again this year? I want my kid to come.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun.
So I think, just as we're wrapping up, I would love to find out, how does the retention, diversity, and inclusion component in your dealership, how does that benefit then translate over to the sales and the customers' experience as well?
So, if we're measuring it, you could suggest that CSI is an ultimate barometer of that. Are people happy? Employee engagement and turnover are things that we look at. They're pretty linear, but they're very indicative of our ability to be profitable and serve customers effectively. Happy people sell. And if you have a sense of your employees' engagement, and it is a diverse group that looks like the population that we're serving, I suggest you sell more cars. Number one, but I think we could suggest, and some might suggest it's by accident. We had a fabulous year, right? And we intend as a group to chase many other fabulous years. When people are at the core and the center of your strategy, customers will be too. And I believe that. I think that if you care as deeply about your internal customer, it will translate into an impact with customers that they feel. That they feel. And it's undeniable. So I have the best job in the company, so I'm happy to do it every day.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been incredibly interesting. I know we could probably stay up here for much longer, but I don't want Madison to come and kick me out. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to another great discussion at our Women Driving Auto Retail Brunch today.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you very much.
Give it up for these incredible women, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go. All right. Thank you so much. Let me get a little shake out of you. Fantastic job. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Morning. We doing all right? Hopefully you're not too hungover this morning, some of you. I'm sure you all responsibly didn't drink at all last night, I'm assuming. Good to have you guys here. Hope you enjoyed that segment. Those of you that are new to our live stage, where you been? We've been looking for you. This is the place to be. We're happy to have you guys here. If you ever need somewhere just to relax, hang out, collaborate, what have you, this is the place to be. We're going to have a whole bunch of topics going on all day long, and that's going to, our next one this is a big deal. So this is really awesome. We had Adam yesterday. We're going to bring him out in just a minute. So I'm going to step off stage in just a second, but just so you guys know what's coming up, it's going to be all about our live stage sponsor from Hierology. You guys know Hierology? It's one of our awesome sponsors. We have the founder, CEO in the house, all right? We had him up here yesterday. We had a cool panel discussion. It's awesome. We're going to bring him out in just a second. So hang with us, folks. We'll be right back on in a minute or two. See you soon. Hirings.